Hello, book club. Happy Wednesday. We're here for our follow-up interview with Stephen Manchester. Now that we have had the month to read the menu, no matter what level of reading the menu you're at in our book club, if maybe you're a new member and you're just starting to see the videos, if you're deciding whether or not you want to read it by learning information through the videos, or if you did read during the month with me, I hope that whatever stage you're at with it, you'll enjoy this interview and that you will enjoy reading the menu or have enjoyed reading the menu just as much as I have. So I have a ton of questions. I've had so much fun reading. My first one, I really wanted to, I didn't realize I could fangirl about a location in a book until I did with your book, because I actually went to college in Turners Falls, Massachusetts.
Oh, so, nice.
Yeah, when you mentioned Deerfield in the book, I started messaging all my friends from college because a couple of them are in the book club too. And I'm like, in this chapter, on this page, they
Deerfield.
You can't wait, you know.
That's cool.
Oh, I was so excited. And so that made me think, like, I know you have a lot of important messages in the book in general. Are the locations that you used really important to you as well?
It is to me, because it's, again, you know, at its most basic level, I wrote this book for my kids, right? So they're very familiar with, you know, the scene settings, and it's an easy, like, you know, I wrote a book called The Rockin' Chair, and I based the thing in Montana, which was a huge mistake for me because, and I pulled it off, but I had to do so much research, and, you know, like, I've never been to Montana, or I'm not a dairy farmer, I don't raise pigeons. So to put something that's set locally, it's just kind of a layup, right? So, you know, even the way people talk, the dialect, you know, the weather, the vegetation, like, I'm so familiar with it because I grew up in it. So for me, it's very important, and it kind of sets the tone where I can focus a lot more on the characters, on, you know, their actions and reactions versus worrying about whether or not I get the scene right. And it's also like paying homage to, you know, to where I come from, right? So I love, you know, when I read years ago when I worked in the prison system, I did some overnight shifts, and I used to read Robert Parker, right? So Spencer for Hire. And all of his stuff is based in Boston. So you're like, well, I've actually traveled down this road. I've stopped at this place. The guy's drinking a Sam Adams. He's eating a sandwich. It just makes it so real, right? So for me, I like to do the same stuff. You know, we live just outside of Fall River, Massachusetts. So there's a lot of Portuguese references. We have a heavy Portuguese, you know, population here. So the food's phenomenal. So I do what I can to pay respect and give everybody a wink from where I come from.
You did a great job with it. When I saw the Deerfield and just hearing like the historic Deerfield, I'm like, oh my God, I've been there. And it just brings you right back in there. You can tell you've been there. So I was curious if you have memories there. And actually, one of my favorite places in the whole world is in South Deerfield. It is the Butterfly Conservatory, Magic Wings.
Oh yeah.
No, I didn't know if you
Right. We do a fundraiser every year called Laughter and Wishes. It's a comedy event. And it's that, you know, help children with terminal illnesses. And every year, Magic Wings will actually send a donation in kind, right? So we kind of raffle that off, but they're a super organization.
They're great. Yeah. I went to college for photography there. It was the Hallmark Institute of Photography. And that was actually one of my first jobs after I got out of it. I worked at Magic Wings and I photographed weddings for a while. So I found myself, I'm reading, I'm like, oh, I wonder if that's going to be in here. But you weren't really in the South Deerfield part, but I started getting all like, ooh, this is so exciting. I know this place. So that's really cool. And actually, my husband loved your book as well. And he wanted me to ask a question for him about locations. He was wondering if it is easier, which you've kind of already touched on it, like writing in locations that you've already been, or do you also kind of find it like, I don't know, even just made up locations when they're in the clouds, like, do you enjoy that just as much, or do you prefer just being in that place where you know?
Yeah, it is. Well, I'll tell you, I love both, but one takes more work than the other, right? So like if I write about a scene setting, a location that I've never been to before, it requires a lot of research, even if I don't actually use the material. So, and I think that holds true across the board, right? So I need to believe it to be true, because I write this reality-based fiction that, you know, I want other people to believe it to be true. So I may write about something in Deerfield that I've never been to, but I really researched it, and I need the reader to believe that, yeah, these people have been there, they're going there, you know, that type of thing. So I need to understand that myself. So, you know, things such as, you know, conversations with God in a cloud, super ambiguous, you know what I mean, and intentionally so. And I don't even want to push that envelope until you get much deeper in the book, where we get beyond the clouds, right? And I start to describe that, or what I believe that to be. So I enjoy both, but one is much, much easier than the other.
That makes sense. I like
Yeah.
that. And we also had a member question pre-submitted from Sharon. I found this interesting. She was actually a little bit curious about the Tina character, because she was wondering, she felt kind of like when we see Tina last, she disappears pretty quickly. So she was wondering if you had more of a storyline, maybe you're going to explore with her and then changed your mind.
I did actually. I have. That's a great question, and I had fleshed it out even more. And Tina kind of hit the editing floor a little bit, because even as I was writing Tina felt like a piece of his past, right? Even though it was happening in the present, it was like, in for this type of book, because we walk a razor's edge between, faith-based, Christianity, and then commercial fiction. I really wanted the character to be flawed, right? So that Finn would be relatable, Maddie would be relatable. Maddie's probably less flawed than Finn is, but to have both the characters relatable. And again, as I was writing it, I wrote a lot more about Tina, and then it all dropped off when we did the edit, because she almost felt like an afterthought. Even though she comes in the beginning of the book, it's almost like, Tina's like one of the last pieces of the puzzle that's a part of his past, right? Before he meets Maddie. So, but I also wanted to be, so without giving anything away, have it to be, quite emotional, where you can almost, feel his pain and his angst about how that ended. And then obviously, as that sets up a lot of the book.
Yes. Yeah, for sure. Even with the edits, I think you did a great job with how you fit her in there, and also because it is, that's life. There isn't always that closure either. Like,
yeah, exactly.
It's just, So I love that. And that also made me think, did anything else when you were editing come out that maybe you miss in the book? Because I know you said you really love how it came out, and you put so much into it. Is there anything that you wish you could add in again?
Yeah, so I mean, this book I did from soup to nuts, right? I didn't go commercial with it, with a big publishing house, because I did not want a lot of it to be cut away. But I did work with a professional copy editor, with professional proofreaders. So, fortunately, I have that support element all around me, right, with the beta team and all that fun stuff. So there were a lot of ideas that fell short in the beginning. And what happens is, like, I get hooked on these secondary characters, right? And then you'll start to develop that. And it's like, the secondary characters are nice, but this is really about Finn and Maddie, and then, PJ later on. But and if I kept it within that realm, then I could really, really dig even deeper, right? So, that's what happened with that. I would say there was probably less editing. And a lot of readers don't know this, but when you finish a manuscript, we don't go by page count, we go by word count. The average word count for my books is around 80,000. So it's considered a comfortable beach read. I'm not writing War and Peace or Harry Potter, right? Those epic. But hopefully I'm putting enough meat and potatoes in there where people feel satisfied when they're done with the book. So with this book, on average, 80,000 words. For some of my other novels with traditional publishers, they would cut away between 30 and 40,000 words.
Wow.
During the editing process. This was much tamer because I controlled it, right? I really did. And also I wanted to be objective, Heather, right? So I went out to these people who are professionals, and I don't want to, just for the sake of, I wrote it, so it must come from the hand of God, right? Like you have to remove yourself from that and say, all right, what doesn't work for this book? So fortunately, I have some really seasoned experience, wonderful editors that I work with, and we were able to cut away a lot less, chaff on this one, because I kept it very, very focused on this one. Like for me, there was a mission to get to the other side of this, right? So that was always in mind as I was moving.
Yeah, that's great. And I wonder too, like, even though you edited some out, it must still help with what you've written in your story and kept.
Oh no, it does.
With your process, I assume, right?
It builds some richness into it. Like, if I've read things that Stephen King's written and whatnot, and he'll say, it's that whole kill your darlings, right? But at the end, like, you really need to almost slaughter the manuscript to get it stripped down to the place where, okay, now it's readable, right? Because, as you go, I mean, most writers love words and the way that we put words together. So you usually overtell the story. So for me, and I kind of pride myself in this, again, we have writers, I consider myself a storyteller. So I don't want to I don't want to go for 3 pages on what the floor looks like, this wooden plank floor, you know what I mean? And there's some writers that really get into it. So for me, I want to give you just enough. Hopefully you can visualize it. Let's move forward. But it's really about, I'm not going for the head, right? I'm going for the heart. So it's all about the characters.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's fantastic. You do a great job of that.
Thank you.
I wanted to kind of ask about the jobs a little bit, because I found this interesting. And I don't know if it's just from getting to meet you in advance before reading your book too, but when we see Finn at his job, and his boss, Steve, comes up behind him and looks over his shoulder at his work, like I just kind of envisioned you looking at your work and being proud of what you created. And I don't know, is that something you kind of translated into a scene there, or am I just
a little bit? Yeah, I think a lot of it's subliminal, right? I mean, and some of it I catch later on and kind of chuckle, because I was in a, I'm sure when I wrote that passage, I was in a mood where I was probably being extra critical of my own work, because you have to be really careful. I mean, you can kill things that you've done where, you get it to a point and I can't make it any better, right? So if I keep working on it, I'm actually going to destroy it. So it's funny that you picked up on it. That's super insightful, because at that point I was probably, kind of balancing. I was trying to weigh out, like, do I leave this alone? Do I go back to it and, risk killing it, right? So
that's interesting, because from my perspective, I'm thinking, like, I felt like pride in that moment. Like when I picked it up, like this pride of like, look at what I've created. Like I've put so much work into it. And it's funny that on your end, it was probably more of like, okay, don't overwork this. Like just,
no, it's so true. And it's all about, for me, I think the genius, and I hate using that word because I don't consider myself one by any stretch, but the genius of trying to work on a novel, or trying to reach for that genius, is turning a very complex storyline into something that's simplistic, right? Where it's, I read the story and I can feel it and I can see it. I can, hopefully I smell certain things. I can visualize it, right? So for my stuff, my hope is, again, you start to feel something in your heart or your soul, right? Even down to your bone marrow. And it's the genius is, or working toward that genius is, I have something super complex. How do I turn this into something that's simplistic, that an 8th grader can read and may not be able to relate to some of the experiences, right? But can absorb those words, because there's different authors. I love all different types of authors, but there are some that will increase my vocabulary, right? Where I have to go to the thesaurus and, and then for me, I want it to sound like my grandfather told you the story, right? Sitting in a rocking chair on a front porch. So that's my style. The more I read, the older I get, the more experienced I am. I think there's no way I'm ever going to change my style, because it's who I am. I've been doing it for 30 years. And I think sometimes I'd like to sound smarter and use bigger words, but I prefer to be a storyteller.
Yeah, no, that is a big difference in style. You're right. Because actually sometimes with the words, it can kind of slow up a reading process too. If you try to go a little too far, like, so it is nice to have that just story tell, listen to the story, and just be able to get right into it. So I appreciate that. I love that a lot.
Thank you.
With Maddie's job, I had a question too. So she worked for Allie Rose Photography. And I'm the type of person, I like to search names and see if it meant something. So I did actually look to see if this was a business, and I found that there's a senior in San Diego with this name. So I was curious, is this someone you happen to know and you were featuring?
It's so funny. When I was writing that passage, I have a very good friend, actually a couple, Dennis and Giorno, and their daughter's name is Allie Rose. So we were golfing, and I'm a terrible golfer. He's actually really good. So when we pair up, I'm with him because I'm the guy that stinks, right? But afterwards, we go have a sandwich and a cold beer, and they were asking me about the book, and I'm like, oh, I'm working on this. Is kind of where I'm at. And I went home and did some writing that night, and it became Allie Rose Photography. And again, a wink to him and his wife, right, where I named the daughter.
I like that. That's really cool.
Yeah, they get people get a kick out of that. I mean, it's fun to do that stuff if you can.
Yes. Yeah, and I did hear in the other interview that you did over the last month where you're mentioning about Mason, which is such a tragic story. I'm sorry to hear that. But it's a beautiful respect that you paid, in that of carrying him on. I really love what you did with that. And for those, I guess, who didn't watch that interview, if you want to talk about Mason a little bit, in case.
So my daughter Isabella. So my wife and I have 4 kids. The youngest is Isabella. We call her Bella, but she just turned 17. But she's been dancing and competitively for the last few years. And two of the girls that she danced with, their little brother was tragically struck by a vehicle, and he passed away. He was 6 years old. His name was Mason Stern. So as I'm writing, and I was really close to being done with this book, Heather, and then it felt like I wasn't done, right? So there was a fundraiser. We got involved. My wife and I got involved in the fundraiser, and I offered up, if you donate, whoever wins the silent auction will go in the book. Your name will go in the book to be with Mason. And his grandmother bid on it. And I went to the grandmother and said, "I'll put you in the book anyway." But they were trying to raise money to put a playground together. But I went to the parents. I asked for their permission, and I said, "Listen." And before it was over, I ended up using his parents' names, his grandparents' names, his sister's names, his name, and again to show respect to the family, because hopefully 50, 100 years from now, people are reading the menu and read the name Mason Stern, who at 6 years old provides some pretty cool advice, right? So it was my honor to do that. It truly was.
That is beautiful that you did that, and that extra meaning behind it. I can't say enough about that. It's sad and beautiful, and you've turned it into something, that they can hold on to,
Yeah, right. Just a little bit of something, right?
Yeah. I had a question about dreams. So there were a lot of segments where Finn is dreaming about talking to death and God. And I was still a little like, I was wondering, did you want that to be kind of a communication there? Or was it more just like his guilt and his mind kind of just in a dream?
I am so happy that you asked this question, because you were the first to ask it. And this is one of the places. So, when you write a novel, it's not necessarily written in a vacuum, right? There's other things that are going on in the world at the time. So while I was writing the menu, the only other project that I kind of took part of is I was asked by my daughter's high school drama teacher. So she goes to Joseph Case High School. In Massachusetts, they're renowned for their drama, right? They compete, and it's just really intense. They go to states. It's amazing. It's wild. If you walk in the theater, it's like a shrine. So they have all these banners. So he came to me and said, "Hey, what do you think about collaborating on a project?" So long story short, we took out, and I believe it was either 16th or 17th century, a story that had been written by a monk called Everyman. And he said, "Is there any way you can modernize this?" So I did. And those dream sequences come from that stage play. And these kids ended up going to states that year. So they qualified, they won prelims, they did semis, they ended up going to states. And I use just small captions that I thought I could use within the story, because again, he has this flawed background, he's a sinner like the rest of us. And there's always that, like, where am I going to end up? So it kind of worked. And there's a little bit of comedy involved in that as well. So I'm so happy you mentioned that, because it's, to me, when I look at books, there are certain crossover parts, and that's one of the parts that crossed over in my life, right? That most people would never know.
Yeah. Oh, that's so cool. Yeah, because I found myself each time the dream was going on, I'm like, ooh, when is the reveal? Like, is it real? Is this what is he just dreaming? I thought it was great. So that's fantastic.
And the kid that played Death in the play ended up going on to college, but he was award winning for. And it was so wild, because the way I wrote it is, that's basically a stand-up comedian, like, let's go, pal, right? And it's time to go home in a different way, right? But I just love that I shared that with all these high school kids that are now in college. So
that is really cool. There really is. I mean, I bet we could ask you a million questions and still never unbury all of the amazing like things you put in there that are so personal to you and to everybody around you. I think that's amazing.
Yeah. Well, thank you for that question, because you were the first to ask it. I'm so happy you did.
Yay. Well, I'm glad. I know I try not to repeat questions too. I've been watching like you must get so sick of answering the same things over and over.
No, but I understand. I just my thing is, it's not the question. It's, I don't want it to be a canned answer. You know what I mean? Like the book, I wear my heart on my sleeve, right? Especially as a writer. So I don't want to do it any differently, right? When I'm interviewing about a book. So it's important that I give those insights, because again, it helps people, helps people connect to me. It helps them connect better to the story. So
yeah, definitely. And I try not to overload you with questions, because I sat here with a notebook reading, like, oh, I want to ask him about this and this. I was so into it. And like, I don't want to forget this.
Yeah, it's all good.
I appreciate you bearing with me with all my million questions. So I was going to ask too, in regards to the dreaming, do you ever get story ideas from dreaming?
I do. I got to tell you, it's it's a blessing as much as it is a curse. People will actually come to me and say, and this is almost funny at this point in my career, but hey, do I have a story for you that you have to write? And it's like, yeah, maybe you have to write it. You know what I mean? Because I have so many ideas and there's no way I'm going to have enough time to do it. Right. So it's a blessing, but again, it's also a curse. Usually for me, they'll hit me out of the blue. And sometimes it will be a dream, but I'll wake up and it's not just the dream. It's the feeling attached to the dream where it's like, oh my God, like I went somewhere where, I don't know if I should have been there or, you know what I mean? Like I went to a different place and then I come back and I do everything I can intellectually, but I truly believe that it's that old, adage where, a watched pot never boils, right? So I'll have an idea. I'll make sure I'll try to kick it to the front of my brain. And then I'm like, I'm done, right? And then I'll go on a walk with the dog or I'll do something else. And then all of a sudden it will hit me. And if I can get 2 or 3 sentences and I feel like overly excited, like I want to run this dog home so I can jot down the start of a book, then I know I have it. As long as I feel the passion about it, because if I don't, the reader's never going to feel that passion either.
Yes. Yeah. And same with all the emotion in your book. I definitely agree. Like, I can't imagine what it is like to write those emotional scenes, because just to read it, I'm like, I wouldn't have been able to write this because I would have been just crying everywhere and everything would have been ruined. But
and I did too. And I tell people like I think one of the gifts I've been given is I am really, really comfortable in my own skin, right? So I've done enough in my life where I don't really question myself. I really don't care if other people question me. I mean, like definitions of stigma. Stereotypes mean nothing to me. So I feel very comfortable with that. So if you read something in that book that made you cry, there was a really, really good chance that I was crying when I wrote it. And it was exhausting. You know what I mean? Like it's, there are people that come back to me and say, hey, listen, I love the menu, but, I had to take a couple of days off. Like I was, and I'm like, I get it. But like for me, it's not worth the time and effort for me to put pen to paper if I can't take you to a place, on the deep end of the pool, right? There's enough shallow books. I really, really want to do something deeper than that.
Yeah. And you did an amazing job with it. And there's so much real behind it for you too. And for people out there. So I think it makes it just beyond extra special. I love it.
I really appreciate that.
I appreciate you being here again too. I just can't get over like you talking with me and this whole experience. It's been amazing.
Oh, I love the opportunity. And I feel honored that I was the first in your book club.
I know. And it's, you know what, you're a fantastic start to our book club. I'm so glad we got to start with this book.
Good. That'll be bragging rights for me from now on.
There you go.
Yeah.
And I'll be on your social media clicking love on it, right?
Yeah, exactly. Absolutely.
So I was wondering, when you were plotting the characters, I know that there's a lot that goes into plotting in general that you were talking about a little bit before. Did you actually sit and plot their menu choices in general? Because I know the way it's described at the end, like in the beginning, it seemed a little more general. And then you see at the end that they really plotted it out. So how did you kind of do that comparison of menu choices versus their reactions to things?
It's funny because the menu, that front page changed multiple times. In fact, I have a very dear friend who is, and I have to say this because not all friends are, but she's super objective. She's very honest with me. She lives in Florida now. Her name's Hen Zanini, and she is one of my copy editors, right? So, and usually she'll pick up something toward the tail end of the process and really kind of button it up, help me button it up. So she came to me and she said, in the book, Finn asked God, not everybody chooses a conscience, right? I don't know if you remember that passage, but she says, I don't see, she says, I don't see that as a menu selection. So I go back to the front page and I didn't want to go on for multiple pages with the menu selections, right? Like, here's what you picked and this is going to be the cost of it, right? So positive, negative, yin yang. And so then I put in where God says nonchalantly, I think it's on page 3, right? And that was, and she and I will laugh about that. And it's a wink to her, but it's like, I could have taken something else out. I could have put that in, but it was my way of saying, the menu goes on, like you can pick, so when he hands the book back and says, I'll take it all, he gets it all. You know what I mean? So that was kind of easy with Finn. And with Maddie, you don't see as a reader what she selected. So you almost have to trust the fact that, she got it, right? I mean, obviously she went through some pain and suffering, but there was also great beauty and love in her life. So she got both as well. I was afraid, if I had not said, here's the menu back, I'll take it all, then I would have had to go tick for tack, right? Like I would have had to go back and almost draw a line to each thing that he chose to show it. Do you know what I mean? And you
Yeah.
only see a glimpse of his life. I mean, he's going to obviously go on. So the book doesn't end with his end, right? He's still young. He's going to go on. So there's a lot more for him to experience. And I get away with it. You know what I mean? I almost get away with it by saying, give me everything. You know?
Well, I was wondering because I figured that would be just an insane amount of plotting that you would have had to have done to make every one of those connections. So I had been curious.
And that was a very intentional decision too, because for him to say, you know, give me everything, it showed trust, right, between him and God. And like, you know, I trust that everything's going to be okay. You tell me it's going to be okay. So give me everything. He hands the menu back, but it also saves me as a plotter, right? In the back was saying, oh my God, like he selected these 14 things. I have to make sure that I tick each one of these off as we go through the book. So another great question.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah.
And a great answer. I was actually going to ask you, I can tell, like, I feel like every time you talk about the God character, you kind of light up. Like, it seems like you had a really great time writing him, and his humor. And I would love to hear a little bit more of the process like how much fun you had writing God. Like what went into that for you?
Yeah. So I think, you know, based on my own experiences, like it's funny, people talk about religion and faith and, you know, spirituality, and you thought, well, how do you define that? And for me, it's about having a relationship, right? So faith for me is knowing that I am never alone, that I can call on God, and people call God many different things. But, you know, I've been to war. I worked in a prison system, a lot of darkness for multiple years. And I've witnessed that God has a sense of humor, you know what I mean? Even in the darkness, right? But it's just, you trust that everything's going to work out okay on the other end, right? You may lose on a certain experience, or you may find something to be traumatic or tragic, but hold on, right? Because it's not over yet, and you're not sure what's going to reveal itself later on. So for me, I believe in my heart of hearts that God is unconditional love, unconditional love. I believe that. I truly, truly do. So why wouldn't he have a sense of humor? And if he did, would he not be more approachable, right? So we can go, you know, not to be biblical, but if you go, you know, Old Testament, it's fire and brimstone, right? You go New Testament, it's all about the love, right? So I'd rather it be all about the love, right? And one of my favorite passages in the book, and I think it's the narrative that says this, but when one of the characters passes and opens her eyes and God's standing there, it was like she just came off a roller coaster from her first ride, right? And he was all excited, like, how was it? So because he's experiencing everything he created through her as well. So there's that, you know what I mean? Like we are connected, and I don't have to keep saying, hey, we're all connected. We are connected. Like, and I want the story, at least within that book, within the confines of that book, to prove the fact that we are all connected and that it all comes from that higher source.
I love that. It sounds like the character was kind of born from a feeling, really. So that's amazing. Yeah. And he did have humor. Did you have a hard time adding that humor, like going back and forth with all of the you know, the hard, sensitive, serious topics, and then back and forth with his humor?
No, not at all. And I got to tell you, it's only when I kind of came into my own and I have my own voice and my own style, like have I been able to, you know, inject some of the humor. Most people who know me, like if you met people who have known me my entire life, they would say, you know, he's a clown, he's a jokester, this and that. There are people that haven't read my books that have no idea that I write tearjerkers, or that I'll go to these emotional lengths, right, in order to elicit feelings, or in order to connect me to the reader. So it's awesome to use, because I think we're all multidimensional. I'm not just, you know, the serious guy, right? So when I write, I'm the serious guy. In my life, for the most part, 80% is I'd rather laugh than cry. I've seen some darkness, right? So, but to be able to infuse some of that humor now, and to do it in a character like God, like if you think about how arrogant, you know what I mean, or, you know, audacious it is to write a character that's God and then put words into God's mouth, you know what I mean? Like that's absolutely ridiculous. You know what I mean? But I did it with a pure heart, right? And I did it in a way that wasn't meant to be offensive to anybody. And I wanted him to come across as he was loved, right? Like I think, you know, if you pictured God as this gentle grandfather or gentle grandmother, like gender means nothing to me, but that person in your life where I trust this person 100%. I feel nothing but love from them. There's nothing I could do that they wouldn't forgive. And I wrapped all of that up, and then I called him God.
I love that. That's great. that definitely shows like why you light up when you talk about him, because
Right.
it's a feeling. It's your feeling.
Yeah, it is a feeling.
It's a feeling everyone can relate to.
And it's my faith. It's what I believe that, you know, when I leave here and I go home, I believe that I'm going to meet somebody very similar to that. And and I believe that since I was a kid. Like I felt homesick since I was a kid, right? In many ways, right? So it's not, and I'm not saying, you know, people don't fear death and this book is going to cure that, but you know, if you can feel that connection where there's a little bit more going on than what you can see, right, or hear.
Yeah.
And that's really what it's about.
And I really love how you do that too, because I think it does walk that line you were worried about a little bit, or maybe, you know, mention that you're trying to, that anyone of any religion can still love it. Like,
right.
You know, they have their beliefs in there and
Sure.
the character of God, but you wrote it as a feeling, and you can feel that when you read it, I think,
Right.
even, you know, before getting that answer, like it does come across that way.
Thank you. Well, that means the world to me, because that, if that didn't exist within that book, there would be no reason to even release that book. You know what I mean? God has to come across as a, you know, and Finn and Maddie, the protagonist, but God is the glue, right? So, and it's just the way that he comes in and out and he transitions in and out, and you know the entire time, because he told you, I'm going to be right there with you, right? So there's just that cool feeling where it's like, I'm okay. You know what I mean? Like I'm okay. No matter what happens, I'm okay, because he said I'm okay, and I trust him.
And your book does a great job of carrying that over and giving that feeling to a person too after, no matter, I think, their religion, because I enjoyed all that comforting from it too. It really is nice. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. I was going to ask too, there are a lot of serious, tragic topics. And I had kind of a couple theories and ideas on it, and I wasn't sure, like, love is such a big part of your book. So I'm thinking, is that the big good? And all these other tragics are really just like the balance of the big bad. I also wasn't sure, like, if you, as an author, were you hoping to use your voice to get empathy in people even talking about these things?
Yeah, well, I'll tell you, the empathy is a huge word. My wife's a elementary school principal, and they use empathy constantly with these kids, which I love, right? It's like, you know, if you just try to put yourself in somebody else's shoes, right? Maybe, you know, you don't become so angry about, you know, racial injustice and all this craziness that's going on in the world right now. I mean, I really believe for the most part, we got to erase most of it, right? With empathy, true empathy. Do you know what I mean? So some of the stuff, you know, and I'll say it so the audience knows it, but it was very difficult to open a book up with abortion, right? Because people right away are like, you know, how I feel about it. So I either take a hard right or I take a hard left. He has his own feelings on it, and I'm not going to give it away in the book, right? But it's not, it almost goes past, you know, I believe this politically, or I believe, you know, I'm a conservative, or I'm you know, it's not about that. It's about when you look at it eternally, right? In the long term, right? This covenant, or, you know, you have this legacy within a family, and there's a lot of pain that goes into it. So it starts off with a very painful thing. And I've had people come to me, Heather, and say, I can't finish the book because of that, because of my belief system. I said, well, you didn't go far enough, because if you went a little bit further, you would understand that it's not intended for that. And then when you get to the end of the book, you know exactly why I used it, right? And it's all around love. It's just wrapped around love. You know what I mean? Yeah. So you're absolutely right. So if love is the gift that they both received, and it was the biggest gift, then there's a price to pay for that, right? So when you call the waiter for the bill, right, you have to pay for it. In some of that payment, again, if you can't have any of the light without the darkness, then there's going to be things that happen in your life where you're going to pay against that. You know what I mean? And in many respects, I believe that as well. I think there's, you know, I don't know if there's an exact ledger, right? But it weighs out, it balances out. I think that's just the way it was designed. It's what I feel, right? So a lot of heavy subjects. Whatever I tackled, it wasn't, you know, done without great thought, right, or intention. And there was some stuff that was even removed, you know, where it's like, I don't want the book to be about this cause or about that cause. It's not about a cause. It's about real life, and we're going to experience certain things that are absolutely terrible, right? But if you hold on long enough and you get to the other end of it, you know what I mean, then you're going to find the sun comes out again, right? And you may even find some reasoning around it. So
That's great. And yeah, and that is how it feels at the end. Like you just got to get through, like even the beginning when you see it's kind of going to come first full circle. I like
yeah,
how it doesn't feel scary as you read it. You know,
right,
like
right,
in
right,
any
right.
other book in that context, when you know where he's headed, I feel like it'd be like, oh no.
Yeah,
You
yeah.
know?
And I'm so happy you said that because, like, in the beginning, I mean, that's what God tells them, right? So, as a writer, in my head, I have this conversation between Finn and God, that original conversation before he comes into the world, right? So, there are promises made, there's a covenant made between them, and there's this trust that's established. He doesn't remember it, but the reader will. So, as I'm writing it, as I'm going through it, it's like, no matter what happens, he's going to be all right. He's going to be fine. His wife's going to be fine, right? He doesn't realize that, she picks some different things, right? And then all of a sudden his son is born and he's going to pick a whole different life, right? That the dad can't control, but you need to have some trust, right? That you came here to experience certain things and you're going to have your purpose and your passions and all that other stuff. So, yeah.
Yeah, I loved that. I loved kind of taking those pieces into, to be able to carry those in my own life, with me after
Right.
the book. It's amazing the way you wrote this.
Thank you.
Yeah. Oh, and that brought me to something you mentioned too. So you have a lot of metaphors between like actual menu ordering with food that
Right.
come up. And I loved them all. Like every time he's got a real menu in hand, I'm like, this is amazing. Do you
Right.
have like a particular one that you're most proud of? I thought that was so fun.
No, I loved all of them. And it was a reminder that it's almost a joke. It's almost like I'm the writer, have the other reader, and I actually give you a wink, right? So when Finn picks up a menu, he's like, I don't know why this is, but I always like to hold on to the menu. Well, have you ever ordered anything else? No, but I don't. It's kind of quirky. I know it's crazy, but I love to hold on to the menu. We always keep one menu at the table. And the reader kind of knows, like, okay, you know what I mean? He doesn't remember, but I do. So it's like, it's you and God having this little giggle on the side while Finn's going through his life, in many cases stumbling along, right? In the darkness, well, you as the reader understands exactly what he's going through, and in some cases why. Because it's always about the why, right? And I think it's really cool when a character doesn't know why, but the reader does.
Yeah.
And there are a lot of writers, and I love mystery and I love thrillers. And there are writers that spend a long, long time baking in these twists and these turns to get to the end and then do that big reveal. This book, The Menu, the big reveal was in the beginning, in the very beginning. And the reveal was to the reader, and then you throw a veil across the protagonists, and then the reader basically sits with God and watches this transpire. So it's just that, and I love the concept of it and the feeling of it. And even when I was writing it from start to finish, it kind of felt like it was wrapped in a warm blanket for me, right? Like it didn't matter, like nothing could go wrong for these people because, you know what I mean? They chose it.
Yeah.
So that whole free will thing. And
Yeah. And I loved that. I loved even the way when he was holding the menus too, like, and he's, like when he was by himself, he was so miserable with his whole experience.
right,
And then he's with Maddie and
right.
oh, everything's beautiful and everything looks great. And on the menu, I loved the way you did that
Right.
and added that extra in there.
Yeah, it's fun. That stuff's fun, and it's almost like icing, right? Like, you get those basics down, you bake the cake, you put it together, and all right, let me dress this thing up. And those things are fun because again, they're winks, to the reader. And anytime I can do that, I'll do it. Another way that I do it is I'll bring in characters, from other books that'll show up. Didn't really happen in the menu so much, but in other books I've done that, and people love it because they'll read, the Rocking Chair, and then they'll get to Goodnight Brian, and they're like, oh my God, one of the characters from the Rocking Chair shows up in Goodnight Brian as a secondary or tertiary character that just passing through, right? But it kind of links you together. So it's fun. It's a lot of fun. And those little, and I'm so glad you picked up on the menu thing because even though it's fun, it does help to seal it, that much closer together.
Yeah, you really feel, I definitely picked up on it. I'm like, this is amazing. I love how we did this.
Yeah.
I hope he goes to lots of restaurants in the rest of the book because I think this is great.
Because he loves to eat.
He loves to eat. Make those menu choices.
Exactly. So cool.
Oh gosh. I wanted to ask you a little bit more about the way you described the movement of time in so many different ways in the book. It really blew my mind. I love that. Was that harder or easier to world build your story with that?
Yeah. So when you look at chapter 1 and then chapter 17 and half of chapter 18. So unless you've read the book, people aren't going to pick up on this, but that is the core, the absolute core of the story, right? So that is 10 years of research and me reading and, and doing some soul searching on what I believe. You know what I mean? So, and time becomes that for me, like where it's like, I had an aunt that passed a couple of years ago, and I imagine, when she made it home, right, and got together with my grandparents, she wasn't suffering anymore. She was of a different age. You know what I mean? So it's like that's my faith, right? So I bake that into that. So time becomes something where I want to hit on it, and I want people to think differently about it because it's a different perspective. It's like one of the opening scenes, and I don't want to give the whole thing away, but it takes a few paragraphs before you realize what the heck's actually happening, because it comes from a different perspective, right? The time is the same thing. So when we get, outside of the earthly realm and you get into heaven, everything changes, all time changes, right? So, and I will give this away, but when God asks Maddie, do you want to meet, your grandchildren? Like, I think like just that one question kind of lights me up, right? And it makes me feel so awesome about it, because it's like, oh my God, like this goes on, we're connected. Like it's just proof positive that I was here before it started. I came here, I did my thing, I'm back home, and then you know what I mean? I'm connected to people who haven't even gone yet. You know what I mean? So really, really cool. But the time thing, I didn't want to do it intellectually. I wanted it to be like from here. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah, that was fantastic. It kind of, I loved the way you did that. It kind of kept it was together, but its own separate thing throughout the
Right.
whole way.
Right.
If I'm explaining it well, but
Yeah, no, I just think, I've listened to people who are, physics geniuses, and they'll talk about bending time, and, and for me, it's much simpler, right? So if you can get to a place where the past, present, and future converge into one, right? And 1,000 years is no more than a moment, then that changes everything. Do you know what I mean? So all of a sudden, all the regret, all the stuff, like it's just a part of it. You know what I mean? Like ride the river. And
yeah.
I wanted to have that vibe where it's like, you're fine. You know what I mean? Like you just ride the river, keep your legs up so you don't smash them on the rocks, right?
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
I had kind of a fun question. I felt like your wines were described in great detail, and there's a
Yeah.
vineyard. Do you consider yourself a bit of a wine connoisseur? Is that kind of
I,
a thing
I
like on
don't,
the
and I
side?
wish I was. I really wish I was. My wife loves wine. I'm more of a beer drinker. I wish I was a wine connoisseur because I love the whole idea around it. But the wedding scene that takes place in the vineyard, my sister Darlene had one of the most beautiful weddings, and she's 16 years younger than I am. So my parents had children, two daughters, when my brothers and I were almost grown, right? So we were teenagers at the time. So I went to her and I said, "Listen, I want your permission. I'm not gonna betray you by putting conversations in or any intimate details, but the setting itself." So what I did is I took her wedding and I plopped it in the book. So the dialogue is very different, and it's very personal to Finn and Maddie and the family members, not to my family. But that clam bake, the wine that was on the table, that's from my sister's wedding.
Wow, I love that, to have
Yeah.
that basis that you could just kind of play
Yeah.
with the dialogue and
Yeah.
oh,
And she
that's
was really cool about it. She's like, take it. And so it wasn't hard to do. So I had to research, what did we actually eat? Because a few years had gone by, but I could still feel it, right? I could feel the heat, and it was kind of on the ocean, so you could feel the sea breeze. And by feeling something, it's much easier for me to capture. Again, even if I don't put it into words, as I'm writing it along, I know I'm not just looking at something two-dimensional. It's much, much, deeper than that for me.
and it's funny, there's something about the wedding scene and the honeymoon scene. I
Yeah.
actually realized something while I was reading it. I got so deep into the way you've written the scene that I like started to consciously realize how great it was to be like back out of the non-COVID world, like
Right.
with
Right.
everybody
Right. Right.
around, the way you did that. And it's
Yeah.
funny how it just kind of came to me while I was reading that, like, everybody close together doing their thing. You see the guests peppered out over the
Yeah.
balcony.
Right.
And that actually made me wonder, do you think with our new norm now, is that going to change about how you write in the future? Do you feel like
Yeah,
might
it's funny. I have two books that are in the hopper that I don't even publish. So I have a book called Data Novel, which will be out in August. And then next spring, I'm releasing the sequel to Bread Bags, which is an 80s based book that takes place in the summer of 1984, right? Which, based on my family, it's just kind of fun, right? So those are already done. There's no masks that take place. That's a great question. And I don't even know if I can answer it, because we'll see if the world opens up again. And I know a lot of writers are jumping on the whole pandemic thing. And obviously there's a ton to write there, right? But at some point, it's going to be like beating a dead horse, right? Like we've all suffered through it for better than a year, and the social distancing. I'm not sure if it continues on, then I don't think I'm going to have a choice. Well, I'm going to have to bake it into the story, but I would rather not, because if I talk about the pandemic, it'll be in passing, and maybe it's somebody wearing a T-shirt saying we survived 2020, right? So I will acknowledge it, but I don't know how deep I want to get into, because to me, that's just so much negativity, right? Whether or not you were a senior in high school, or you couldn't have a big wedding, it's just awful, right?
Yeah.
So I'm glad some people are going to capture. I'm just not sure I'm the guy.
Yeah, I just found it interesting when you brought up the wedding scene, because I did remember thinking between the wedding and the honeymoon, that's where it struck me, like, oh, this is like the world we used to live in. This is beautiful.
Right.
Like I missed it.
Yeah, and I'm going to tell you, those two chapters, Heather, were a little concerning, because when you're writing along, it's the segues in and out of chapters, and you never want to get too disconnected. So you never want to go down a side road and keep going for too long, and then try to get people back on the highway. So both those chapters could have actually been short stories, right? Where it's I could swap out the names, and rather than Finn and Maddie, it's Joe and Maria, right? And put them on a honeymoon and take all those same, and it wouldn't have made a difference. So having those chapters back to back, again, some real intentional conversations that went on between me and some of the editors to say, what do you think? Are we too far removed from the actual story? And it's like, because I was building the characters, it worked. I hope it worked.
Yeah, I think it worked.
All right, good.
Let's see. Oh, so my next question, do you feel like all of your characters in the menu made the world a better place, made their world a better place, like the beautiful advice you had in your book?
I think so. Yeah, I think so in the end. I think they're very real. I think they're relatable, super flawed, which makes them relatable. Hopefully they're lovable. I mean, it's nice to have an antagonist in the book where, we call it a goat, where, you put everything on the goat and the readers love everybody else. Didn't really think we needed all that much. I mean, within the dream sequences, we have death. There's some stuff that you wouldn't embrace a couple of characters, but for the most part, hopefully they conveyed a message of love, and unconditional love. I feel so close to this book, and it's funny. Usually it's, I'll get done with a book and, I'll take a shower, I'll go out for dinner and celebrate. And I just feel really sad, right, that it's over. But with this book, I didn't feel that, because I see me still talking about the menu in 20 years. With some of my other works, is, you get done with the marketing and the promotion and goes to your backlist, you get on to the next project. And I've written a book every year. I don't have any intentions of doing anything differently, because it's what I love to do. But the menu really is that special to me, where it's a message that, I want to get out into the world. Even if it only makes, a person or three people feel better, then well worth the time and effort, truly.
Well, I know I enjoyed it, and I know I've been seeing some really great feedback in our book club group. So I think you have reached a lot of people, and it's funny how you said relatable and lovable characters, because I'm pretty sure those are a couple words about your characters right out of the review I wrote. So
right, yeah, good.
They are.
Yeah, because it's, if you can't see yourself in Maddie, if I can't see myself in Finn, even pieces of it, then and my job again is to write the 80%. The other 20% is for you to take all of other attributes for somebody that or love, or even yourself, and apply them. And then suddenly the story becomes yours. And once it becomes yours, it's easy. It's like a layup for me, right? So it's just fun.
You've done your part, and now you're handing it on. I love the way
exactly. We recently, and I'll just be quick with this, but Claude Tatio, who's also a dear friend, and he's an editor on the book, he was really, he was heavily involved in this book and the messaging of it. And he and I are now speaking to hospice, a place called Hope Health. So they're volunteers, caregivers, and the message really aligns with their mission, right? So it's like right in that wheelhouse, right? So I think it was last week, we were both the keynote speakers for their volunteer appreciation night, and it was awesome to say, hey, listen, in 4 to 6 weeks, we're going to get back together, we're going to have a session, we're going to talk about the book, but these are people that need to be recharged because they're going into homes with people that are on their way home, right? Actually going home. So it's just awesome to be able to share that. And again, I'm not trying to change your religious belief system, right? Or your faith. I'm just trying to say, hey, listen, you're never alone, not ever. And I want you to feel that. I don't want you to just read it on the front cover because it's on the front cover. You could read it and put the book down. It's done. That's the message. But when you get to the end of it, I really want you to feel that. The same way that I've read certain books where I felt the message and it stayed with me for a long time. And
Yes.
in some cases, it's still with me. So that's my hope for the menu.
Yeah, this is definitely one of those books that I think will stay with people once they've read it. I know it's going to stay with me. I can already feel it. There's just so much deep emotion in there. I think it's good. You cry it out and then you can just carry it with you.
Right. And then you have it. Right. Yeah, true.
So I was completely intrigued with Maddie's experience. I don't know if we're playing the field here, not to give too much away, but her non-Earth experience. There were so many things, her dog, and
the shadow. Yeah, right.
Yeah, there's a lot. I don't know if you want me to not say things.
No, you can. No, please.
Okay.
Don't walk on eggshells with this. Go.
Okay. I love the way she could fly if she wanted to. I love the speaking telepathically to each other.
Right.
Lola, that was amazing. Right. There were a lot of things that I'm like, I know you have a request already for the dessert menu, but do you ever plan on doing the appetizer menu so we can see even more about like the soul's journeys? I would love to see that before as well, like, or is that what the dessert menu would be? I don't know.
Yeah, I'm not sure. To be, again, I've been writing for 30 years and really, probably professionally for about 20. Never written a sequel until I did Lawn Dots and Lemonade, which is for the 80s series, but that was just a ton of fun, right? And I pumped those books out in about 5 or 6 months. This, the menu took me, again, close to 10 years. So the dessert menu, or whatever I decide to title it, whether or not it comes from Finn Jr. or, to your point, we actually play with time, right? Because it's not, I think the cool part of this book is it lends itself to a sequel, right? I like to think if you get done with the menu, then it was a satisfying ending, right? Like you don't have to pick up another book. I hate when people do cliffhangers and you got to read 7 books in order to get to the end, right? But to write a sequel, or I should say a book that lines up with the menu, where all the characters are still there, regardless in which realm, right? Because Maddie could still be there. And, Finn could now be with Maddie, and then their son is now older and he has children. You know what I mean? So God's never going to change. That's going to be your constant, right? I could probably put even more humor into it, right? Because now the safety net's been built in. Everybody knows, they're going to be fine no matter what happens. So now I can really wheel some stuff, right? And get people on their knees, right? So yeah, I don't know if it's an appetizer menu or a dessert menu, or if it's just another version where I bring in, the second half of the menu, right? Where we play with that whole time continuum where it's, maybe before Finn and Maddie even got here, we have a conversation where they agree. You know what I mean? That they're going to be together. You know what I mean? You have that.
Yeah, see, that's what I found myself really wanting to see that. Like, you get that hint of, oh my gosh, okay, so what's that like of them all meeting? Like, she talks to her dad, and that conversation of, okay, they knew each other before. I would love, I just felt myself wanting to see all of that.
Yeah. That's my favorite part of the book. Like when Maddie opens her eyes and she's home, right? And that's me trying to teach my children not to fear death, right? So I want to believe that, when my kids pass, the first person, and I'm going to ask God to allow this, right? But that I'm there. Do you know what I mean? And so that you don't have that fear, right? So if you're reading the book and you're engulfed in the book and you're believing some of what the message is telling you, right? Then, she opens her eyes and her grandmother's there, right? And you can smell the French toast, right? And then her father's there and he's asking for forgiveness. And then you have all this stuff that goes on where you're like, oh my God, like how awesome is this? right? And they were kind of all in on this scheme of this conspiracy with God, right? So that she ended up fulfilling her purpose and having the life that she chose. You know what I mean? So it would be really cool. And I'll tell you, I have every intention, Heather, and I make contact in 8, 9, 10 years or whatever when I get done with it. But hopefully it's a lot sooner than that. But I really do want to pick up another book that I don't know what to call it. I don't know if it'll be a prequel, sequel, or it's just, a twin, right, of the menu, where I can attack the time continuum and I can really, because I've already poured the foundation, now I can really take off on, like, don't worry about
I
what
can
happens.
imagine that almost makes it harder because you could go in so many different directions.
Oh my
It's
God.
probably hard to choose because I think the readers, I know I would love to see any direction you go with it, because you're right. It has a satisfying ending you feel good about, but there's also that more in any direction. I would love to know more.
But it's hard. It's because you do have to focus it, right? Like, so if I didn't put in the detail that I did, I could have got more into, Mr. Tatro or Mason Stern. There's a lot of things that I could have done, which in some cases I did do. And again, it dropped on the editing floor, but it was like, I need to stay, like, I can do this, but I still need to stay on that same road, right?
Yeah.
So I would have to pick. I really would have to pick, like, even if I pick 2 or 3 POVs or points of view, and I say, all right, so I have Finn Jr., but I also have, suppose we just combine Maddie and Finn, but they're no longer here, they're there. Like, we could do some really cool stuff with it.
Oh, I will be very intrigued to see whatever you do next.
Awesome.
For sure. Good. Yeah. And I don't know if this kind of goes with the souls questions too, but I noticed that Finn kept saying there was a significance with the stars. Like it's why he became an architect. Is that kind of part of the souls? Because I know they're on clouds talking. Is that something?
Yeah, it's almost like otherworldly, right? So it's the filament. Like, he looks up there and God makes this comment in the beginning where Finn asked that he be creative. And God said, oh, I've always loved the process of creation myself. And it just showing God's sense of humor. You know what I mean? So for me, it's a reminder, even as a writer to myself, it's a reminder that, God created that. And it's this beautiful thing that goes on. He obviously writes poetry, right? So he's inspired by that. But so again, you have all these things that are connected. He may not know why or how they're connected, but they're connected. And hopefully the reader, even though you don't know completely how it's all connected, you feel it. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, that tie-in that keeps going. Yeah.
Right. So we're connected. I may not see certain things, but I feel them.
Yeah. So we had another question. I guess this kind of all connects to your next writing experience here with this, if you do. But another question that came in was, do you plan on doing the flip side, maybe writing, because it sounds like even Maddie's character, Maddie's dad, he was asked to not be nice to her, to help her fill her purpose. So are there the souls that are just bad? Like, what was your thought on that, or something to write?
You know what? That's a great idea. So, for one of the books that inspired me, I read it years ago, was The Shack, right? So The Shack is absolutely devastating in the beginning, right? So, well, I'll give it, and I'm not going to give anything away, but for those who haven't read it, but the writer actually takes the darkest corner that you can imagine and puts a flashlight on it, right? So it's like, well, how do you believe in goodness and unconditional love when such tragic and twisted things happen in the world? So I spent, again, the better part of a decade as a correctional officer, then a prison investigator. So I've met some people that were not born with consciences, that you could call them sociopaths, psychopaths. I mean, they would just as soon do some heinous things to you than eat a grilled cheese sandwich, right? So there is that. And I also, what's wild about that question is I also have the experience of having been in a prison, right? So one of Stephen King's greatest books I've ever read is The Green Mile, right? And it's not because like everything's set in the prison, but it's all based around the characters. So how cool is that? You know what I mean?
Oh, wow, we have Karen. Hi, Karen. Hey, Karen. I'm not sure if she can hear us yet, but.
So what's wild about that is I already have the background to tackle something like that. And, maybe that mirrored image becomes, you have a soul that's a little bit, that's not wired right when they come here, right? So that's a great question.
Yeah, I mean, I guess you kind of did leave that open with the quote we were talking about earlier that I loved, conscious chapter 3, not everybody takes it. So, or page 3, I'm sorry, not chapter 3.
Yeah, that's all right.
Hi, Karen. Thank you for joining us. Actually, now's a great time. Did you have any questions for Stephen or discussions you wanted to bring up while you're here? Because I wanted to make sure it's open to anybody that came in if you had a question. Or if you're just listening in, you're muted right now. I think I saw you talking. I'm sorry, Karen. Let's see if you're able to unmute. Oh, I don't know.
That's all right.
This tech stuff. But if you can get unmuted, Karen, and if you do have a question or if you want to type it in the chat, just let us know so that we can make sure you get your question live. It's good to see you here.
Got it.
You
Thanks,
got
Karen.
it. Yay. Hi, Karen.
I don't normally do these on my phone. I usually do them on my computer.
All right.
Not a problem. Yeah, this tech stuff, I'm still figuring it out too. So not a problem.
So how many how many people are on?
Well, you actually are our first guest coming in, so I'm glad you made it in.
Oh.
We've been doing some questions, and now's a good time. If you came with any questions, feel free to add in, and I do have some more after when you're done.
Well, you can keep going. I'll listen because I'll probably watch the beginning over again.
Okay.
So.
Right.
Yeah, because I pretty much well got the bulk of the questions. I'm at the point now where we're doing the wrap-up questions. So if you think of anything beforehand, just let us know.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, I'm glad
Thank you
you're
for
here.
the book, by the way.
Oh, thank you.
Yes, Karen's one of your winners.
I
Awesome.
was one of the
Yeah.
winners.
Yes, thank you for
Awesome.
subscribing and entering.
I'm glad you won.
Yeah, I haven't had a chance to read it yet, but I will.
Good. I hope you enjoy it.
Looking forward to it.
Awesome. Thank you, Karen. I appreciate that.
And hopefully we did the interview. Hopefully not too many spoilers here for you when you watch, but I think
Yeah, we danced around some stuff.
we did. I tried to be good with my questions.
Right.
That's the hard part, right?
Yeah,
Sure.
enough to make sure you get to enjoy the experience and see what's coming up, but doesn't give everything away.
No.
So my next question for you, Stephen, I was going to ask, so tomorrow my video is going to be about reviews and why they're important. And I would love to hear from you, why are reviews so important after we've read your book?
Yeah. So, most books are, it's almost like a conversation, right? So the review is that feedback that you get on the other end of it, right? So it's really important for me because it's not just praise, it's a way that people are able to share the story and kind of, move it on, right? I appreciate all reviews. I really do. If there's criticism, as long as it's constructive, I really appreciate that. But if somebody enjoys a book, right now in this industry, unfortunately, almost everything's done online, right? So it's very, very difficult if you're not, playing nice with Amazon, right? So when people want to read a book now, the number one way to sell a book or to get somebody to read a book is by word of mouth still. And word of mouth today is social media. And if somebody says to me, hey, you have to read, Beneath the Scarlet Sky, right? You got to read this book. It's fantastic, Steve. The first thing I'm going to do is go to Amazon and look at some of the reviews, right? So they're super, super important. They really, really are. And I tell people, and sometimes it kind of stinks as an author, right? It's difficult to self-promote without sounding like, like a nut job, right? Or somebody who's being, somebody who's being arrogant, right? Like that's the last thing you want. But if people like something that you've done and they go and review it, it's really, really important. It is.
Yeah.
Because it's a way to pass that on to other people. The hope is to, you never want to write a book where 11 people read it, right? You want it to be, and the menu's done really well, but momentum continues to pick up because of the people who are reading it and who are talking about it. And that's because I can only do so much. I try to kick it out of the gate, right? But in order for it to really do something, where we can have the masses reading, it has to be word of mouth. And again, that's through social media and Amazon reviews.
Yep, definitely. And I'm going to do more on reviews tomorrow. I'm going to read my review actually on the video tomorrow that I wrote for you. So just so you know, I've posted it to Amazon, but Amazon seems to take forever when I post
Yeah,
it. So it should be
right.
there. I also posted it to Goodreads. Is
Good.
there another place that helps you for reviews, or are those?
Those are actually, those are the two big ones. You know what I mean? And really, it's almost like, you know, so here's Amazon, here's Goodreads, and then here's your circle, right? So, you know, as an author or a writer, you know, the hope is that people will actually do both, right? Because, you know, you have your book club, so you're sharing it with your people. Hopefully, you know, if Karen loves the book, she talks to a few people about it, and then it just keeps going, right? You have that domino effect, and that's the hope.
Yeah, definitely.
But
And
thanks for doing that,
just
Heather.
to add on to what you were saying before, when you promote your book, you are so passionate about what you're talking about. So I don't think you could ever come off as arrogant talking about what you've done. So just so you know.
I appreciate it.
Yeah, there's that passion behind it. You put so much in it. So
yeah, and I gotta tell you, like this, you know, I've written a lot, right? And there are books that'll come out where it's like, it's a commercial venture. It really is, right? So I wrote the book, and hopefully everybody loves the book, and you know, it's all bottom line driven from the editors all the way out to the marketing folks, right? The menu is very different. Like it's, you know, I've probably given away at least as many or more than what we've sold, right? And that's okay for me, because it's more about the message, right? So the message becomes the mission, and again, it's about helping to connect people, or at the very least, people don't feel alone, right? They're able to relate to something that resonates with them.
yes. And with falling in love with the menu, what do you think would be the next book in your collection that us who loves the menu should go to next that you've written?
Yeah, so some of the earliest stuff. So I signed a contract with a publisher called The Story Plant, and the first book that came out was 12 months, tearjerker. I mean, 2 boxes of Kleenexes, you know, for that one, right? And then it was Goodnight Brian, tearjerker. The Rocking Chair is basically me channeling my grandfather. And I got to tell you, for the longest time, The Rocking Chair was my favorite book that I had read. And it's hard to talk about your books that way, because it's, you know, they're close to giving birth as I'm ever going to get, right? So, you know, I spent 9 months writing these books. I kick them out into the world. And then it's like, okay, what do you got next? What do you got next? What do you get next? So The Rocking Chair, definitely. I wrote a book called Ashes, which I wrote for my brothers. And it's about 2 brothers who are estranged. And they find, and it's actually, Heather, it's the first book where I was able to infuse humor into some of that depth, right, that I write. And these 2 brothers have been estranged for many years, can't stand each other. The only person that they dislike more would be their father. And the father was almost cruel when they grew up, right? So 2 very, very different personalities. And they find out the old man has passed, and that he's requested that they spread his ashes on the West Coast. So I take them from Salem, Massachusetts to Seattle, Washington. And what happens over those few days in the car, I still laugh at some of the scenes, you know what I mean? Where it's like, but it's like, I hate somebody. But what I proved with that book was, you can say you hate somebody, but family's family. You know what I mean? When you get right down to it. I mean, there are things that my family will do where I want to, you know, choke them out, right? But when push comes to shove, nobody's going to get their back like I will. You know what I mean? Like, I grew up with brothers, we fought. I'd lay down on a gutter for either one of them, right? Same thing with my sisters. Like, it's not, and within this book, you get that feeling. It doesn't, you don't have to have a brother, but there's somebody in your life where you're like, I can't stand this person. But when you really think about it, it's all superficial, right? So it's that stuff where it's like, oh my God, I could choke this person, but let me start with a hug. You know what I mean?
Oh, that is another really, really relatable concept. And it's funny, like, it's not something you really think about consciously too, until there's something like your book to remind you, like, yeah, right, you do have someone in your life like that.
And I love that book because of the research. I, you know, unfortunately at the time, my wife and I didn't have the time to do the road trip, because I would love to. Like, I love stopping at gas stations and talking to people in general stores. But what I did is we ended up going to AAA, and they ended up mapping this thing out. And then I did all the research where they stopped in Pennsylvania, and then they stop, you know, they stop in New Jersey, Pennsylvania, and then I have them coming across America. So, you know, they have to eat, they have to go to the bathroom, they have to stop. But the whole time, as the reader, even as the writer, I felt like I was sitting in the back seat listening to these 2 guys go at it. And then just beneath the surface is this love. And I don't want to keep talking about it, but there's this one scene where one of the brothers is, you know, he's just a meathead. You know what I mean? Like, he worked in the prison for 30 years, a tough man. His brother was the brain, right? And he ends up in really almost stereotypical characters, which I normally don't write, but it worked for this book. But they end up at a honky tonk out in the Midwest. And there's a guy at the bar that approaches the brother who's the professor. And he approaches him to fight. And the two brothers have been arguing with each other, but the bigger one steps up and grabs this guy and shows him to the door. And basically says, he's my brother, like I can beat on him, but nobody else can. And as whacked as that sounds, like that's the premise of the whole story. You know what I mean? Like my brother Billy and I had a younger brother, Randy, and Randy had a mouth, right? So when we were in school, back in the 80s, Randy be getting into trouble, and it's like, yeah, he can be a punk, right? But you're not putting your hands on him. He's my brother, right? So there's that love, that crazy love that goes into the book. So it was fun. What a fun write.
Oh, I love that. Those are definitely going on my going to read.
I already wrote them down.
There you go. Karen's on top of it. I love it. And you mentioned Salem, Massachusetts. Every time I read one of your books from now on and I see more Massachusetts, I'm just gonna fangirl because I did go there during college too. I just love the location you included.
And that was so cool, right? Because Salem, obviously Halloween time, it's craziness. And I told my kids, listen, I'm working on a book. I want to start the book in Salem, Massachusetts, and I want to do it around the Halloween time frame. So we go up there. So later on, when my kids, who are now adults, read this, it's like, I was there. Like we walked up, we went from, Red Sandwich Shop. We walked up right this street, took a right. There's a bookstore. Like they were there. They were there with me. And I just put the character in there. And then they walked past Mama and Brian, who are two characters from Goodnight Brian. So I end up doing that multiverse thing with different characters. So people that read my stuff, they get a huge kick out of, people from other books showing up, characters.
I feel like that's really unique. I don't think I've ever heard of other authors doing that where they're not like a sequel to the book.
Yeah.
And then
I've seen Stephen King do it. It's like in the world of Stephen King where you'll see a character. And again, it may just be a glimpse, like, somebody in a diner. But Ashes, for instance, the one we just talked about, and The Rocking Chair, right? So two of my favorite books. They're in Montana, which is where The Rocking Chair took place. There's a blowout. They end up down in a gully. Who shows up is Hank, the main character. And he grabs a tow chain and he says, I'm going to winch out. If I can't get you, I'll call my boy George. And George and Hank are huge characters in The Rocking Chair. So again, if you follow my work, you're like, oh my God, I get to see, Hank McCarthy and his son George again, right? So just a lot of fun.
Oh, wow. I'm looking forward to that as I continue to read your work because I loved the menu and I know that I'm going to. And I wanted to ask too, you have a lot of poems in the menu, which I thought was wonderful. Is that also something you do in your other books or was this specific?
Yeah, every book. I end every book with a poem, and it's kind of a signature move because for whatever reason, if I have a gift, it's in poetry, right? And a lot of people don't know this, but most poets will never make money or have any type of acclaim until they're long gone, right? It's just, but within this industry, it's the purest form of expression, right? So for me, I can capture in a poem what would take me a full chapter, right, to capture. And some of my more popular works happen to be poetry. Like I wrote a poem called A Walk in the Clouds. It was in an anthology that Martin Luther King's daughter ended up publishing. And she ended up going on the Today Show and a bunch of other shows. And they asked her, what's the one piece in the anthology, in the book, that captures your father's work? And she said, A Walk in the Clouds by Stephen Manchester, and then recited it. So some of my poems have a wide audience, right? I wrote one on 9/11. There's different, but I love putting them in books because it's my way of saying, rather than write this full chapter, here's a poem that captures all of that, And it's been a signature move for me for years.
Oh, I love that. That'll be something I look forward to. Yeah. I saw you referring to the book, I think, just now.
Yeah.
Like, oh, where are these poems?
I haven't read it yet.
Yeah, there's a couple in there. And there are some books where I won't use poetry through the whole book and just put a poem at the end. You know what I mean? And then there are others like the menu where I used a few.
Yeah, I loved that throughout and how you made that a part of the character. And then at the very end, I'm like, oh, there's another one.
Yeah, you just have to make the character a poet, right? So it's cheating, but what are you gonna do?
That's okay. I like that. You find a different way to fit it in probably every time, but
right.
It's actually funny because I noticed on the Tattered Page Book Club where I first learned about your work on Facebook today that they posted that it's a National Poet Reading Day or something like that. I forget the exact wording, but I'm like, that's the perfect day for Stephen's interview today.
Yeah, I know. It's awesome. So awesome.
So I only have one question left.
Mhm.
Karen, did you have anything that you want to ask before you read the book, seeing you're in the different stage, like going into it?
I don't think so. I don't
No?
know.
And that's okay. I just wanted to know in case.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And if you do have questions, Karen, you know how to get in touch with me. So, we can connect on it. It's always nice to hear feedback. And again, I'm not looking for praise. I'm looking for, for an honest connection. This book has been really, really cool in the way that I've connected with people that I never knew before. And it's at a level which is very different from, I've had people approach me where they'll talk to me like I've known them for 40 years, right? And then you think about the book and what I put into the book, and it makes good sense, but it's unevenly yoked, right? Because on the other side, I have no idea who they are. So it's kind of a wild conversation, right? But it's cool. It's also
Yeah, it is neat how we as readers, I mean, I don't think we even know, just from the questions I've gotten to ask you, how much of you we get to know when we read your book.
right.
Which
There's
I
a
find.
lot. I mean, there's a lot. And writers can say, well, I'm just writing fiction. Let's be honest. Fiction is something somebody believes. Like until I believe the story, I cannot sell it to you, right? Really. I mean, for reality-based fiction, like you could write sci-fi and, obviously you made the whole thing up, but when you're looking at reality-based or character-driven fiction that's meant to evoke emotion, I have to believe that these characters exist. And I do. I mean, I develop them to the point where, Finn becomes, 7 different people in my life put into a blender, right? And then if something, makes me angry that somebody does, then, I'll add that into the character so that you have that piece as well. Last thing we want is perfection, right? But I want people to see themselves in it, or people in their own worlds, because we're all flawed. I mean, it's the worst thing you can do is build a character where it's like, oh my God, this guy's too good to be true. And there's a reason you said that, because he is, you know what I mean? Or she is. So
yeah, they need to have their quirks and be real.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And Finn and Maddie and all your characters in the book are very real. So you do a great job of capturing that. It's wonderful. Yeah.
Do you base a lot of your characters on people you know then, or
I do.
are they
Yeah, I do, Karen. But it's not like I'm never ever going to write put an antagonist on, in a book where somebody in my world, in my life, knows me and says, oh, that was me, right? It's never going to happen. I'm never going to disrespect somebody in that way. Somebody may see a glimpse of themselves, which is good, and they'll ask me and I'll smile and they'll know, right? Like my kids know. There are pieces of my kids in all these books. There are lessons for my kids in these books without trying to be preachy, so I'm walking that fence. But yeah, definitely. I think just going out into the world and experiencing things. And that's why the quarantine, everybody's like, oh my God, you have so much time to write. So I wrote 2 full-length novels in 2020. And I'm done right now because, the sponge has been wrung dry. I need to go out into the world and interact with other humans, right? Where it's like, and I'm not trying to steal phrasing. It's nothing like that. It's just being around people and living it and saying, you know what I mean? Like you go to a pizza place, you smell it, you know what I mean? You have that feel to it. Then all of a sudden when I put the pizza place in there, it's not like I'm trying to imagine it. I'm just trying to convey it, right? It's real.
So, makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah, you'll see later when you rewatch the interview, I still love the way you describe the wedding and stuff like that. So it is amazing how you can take something real and then just make it completely not real, but you have that basis. And I think that's amazing.
And a lot of it's just dialogue. Like you can, my wife and I go somewhere, we go for dinner, and she sees me like looking around. She's like, oh, this is going in a book. But what she also knows is, right? Yeah, this is going to go in the book, but what you and I are talking about, never going to go in a book, right? What you and I share with each other is never going to go in a book. And the same holds true for my family and friends. Like I would never betray people that way. But I do take scene settings, I do take experiences, and then I'll twist them, turn them up on their head so that it's never going to be, oh, I was with Steve when this happened, and, we watched this terrible thing go down. Nope. Like, I don't think I could ever be accused of that, to be honest with you. I wrote 2 nonfiction books when I first started. Definitely, there are people that can point to that and say I was with him, or this happened, or or debate me on whether or not it happened that way. But with the fiction, there's just way too many options to have to do that.
Yeah.
I love it. So before we go, I want to make sure that please keep you know, in our book club, you can post and give us updates. We're all going to want to know your next book's coming out and everything, and keep us posted on that. I know you've mentioned. And
when you post it up too, I just wanted to say, Heather, when you post it up on social media, so I'm obviously following you too. If somebody asks a question, I'm going to answer the question. So don't feel free, you know, don't feel like you missed any of this. I mean, the idea that we're recording it is fantastic. And I know it's a tough time frame for some people and other people can't. It's all good. You know what I mean? It's all, we live in a world where, you know, we can jump in and out of it. So.
Exactly. Yeah. So you might have people come back later because that's kind of how I've set up this unique book club. So anyone can jump in and come back and, you know.
No, I love it.
So.
Yeah, I love it. I mean, I've shown up for things and there'll be 100 people there and there'll be 2 people at another thing. And it's always like, oh, I feel like, listen, it doesn't, like, this doesn't even matter anymore with the Zoom. If you're recording it, you know what I mean? It's going to reach an audience that's much bigger than you and I could ever imagine, right? So I'm grateful for the opportunity. I really am.
Yeah, this has been fantastic. And where else can we follow you on social media and keep up with your work and updates?
Yeah, so on Facebook, I'm also on Twitter. And my daughter recently pulled me out of the dark ages and put me on, what is that called?
Instagram, I think is the one.
Yes, I'm on Instagram. Which is so funny. Like, it's weird. Like, Facebook plays really well. If you look at my demographic, I'm not selling to young adults, right? I'm, you know, my demographic is primarily female. So 85% of my readership is female and a little bit older, right? Like, you know, which is awesome, right? So that's Facebook. And then you go to Twitter, for whatever reason, there are a few writers who have been able to make Twitter work. It's really, really difficult, right? Given the limited, you know, stuff that you can put on there. And then for whatever reason, Instagram works well, as you know, because people just share. It's a quick like snapshot. Could be a book cover, somebody holding the book. So I'm all over the place. I'm also at stephenmanchester.com. So if people want to connect me with me there. Probably the best place for me is on Facebook. So I see social media as the devil, and I also see it as a means to reach people that I never could, right? So it's a necessary evil, right? I wish there was a lot more positivity, like this dog barking, but I wish there was a lot more positivity on Facebook and social media, but that's what I use it for, right? And that's where I go, you know, to connect with other people of like minds and interests. So
that's perfect. Yeah. And we're lucky mine hasn't barked too, if it makes you feel any better. He's being particularly good. So
yeah, that's good. That's good. Yeah, I've been on eggshells ever since we started with this. This puppy's about a year old and wild as the wind. And I'm not sure I'm gonna tame her. You know what I mean? I like her wild.
Oh no, well that's half the fun though, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, she's a free spirit, this one.
And I can't leave without mentioning, is that a leg lamp from A Christmas Story behind you?
Oh, absolutely. 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 So my dad passed away 2 years ago, right? And my father had the most twisted, like the greatest sense of humor. So when he passed, I grieved hard, right? But as part of the grieving, I wrote him a book called Bread Bags and Bullies, which is a thank you letter to him, also a love note to the 80s. The one thing my dad and I shared is every Christmas we watched at least one episode of this, right? And I saw Gene Shepard as, again, not a phenomenal writer, but just an amazing, like almost a miraculous storyteller, right? So he's been an inspiration to me. I used to take it down after Christmas. My wife has been very gentle with me the last couple of years where I just leave it up. She pretends like she can't see it. I'll occasionally put it on for the neighbors, you know what I mean? But it's a reminder. It's basically, again, a wink to my dad and also a reminder of, you know, it doesn't, like, you can make an impact with people. It doesn't, I don't always have to make people cry, right? I can make them laugh too, right? So that light was on when I wrote both of those books, the 80s books, and it's been a lot of fun.
That's fantastic. I love that. You are amazing at paying like this homage to people in your life.
I think you have to, right? We're not doing this stuff alone. You know what I mean? Like this, you know, they say it takes a village, but I believe that in all things, right? So in order for me to be successful, I need to be around people that, again, you know, have similar hearts and, you know, interests and ideas. So again, super happy to be here for that.
Definitely. Oh my gosh, this has been amazing. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
I can't thank you enough. This has been the best month starting off our book club and reading the menu and getting to speak with you twice. This is great.
Yes, it's been awesome. I really appreciate it, Heather. Thank you so much for what you're doing, not just for me, but for other writers too, right? Especially at this point in time, it's really difficult you can't get out into the community, right? It's hard to rub elbows. You can be a successful writer and be an introvert. It helps to be an extrovert, right? But within this quarantine and everything that's happening, like what you're doing is super important, probably more so than what you realize. So thank you. And not just from me, but from other writers as well.
Oh, thank you so much. I have such a big passion for reading. I actually work at a library and I read to the kids every Friday. I'm the storytime educator. So I'm around books a lot. I've got my daughter and I've always loved to read. So you guys are like my celebrities. Like I watch TV, but authors are my celebrities. I think you guys are amazing what you do. So.
It's funny. I feel the same way because I'll show up to author events and my wife will laugh. I'll sit in the back. I'll always read something that they've done before I get there because I don't want to, you know what I mean? But I'm always looking for the signed book, right? And again, this is the live stuff. But I remember meeting Jenna Bloom a couple of years ago. I don't know if you guys have read her yet. She's amazing. And I'm in the back of the room and the line forms. So I get to the back of the line, to get my book signed. And somebody gets behind me. I get out of line. I get to the back. I get out of the line. I get to the back. My wife's shaking her head. But I want to talk to her. I just want a few minutes with her. You know what I mean? Because I love books, but I'm more in love with the process. Like, how do you do what you do? I have a very dear friend who's a renowned painter. His name's Brian Fox, amazingly talented. And I'll go down there and, I'm writing these full-length novels and he's painting these giant oil paintings. And you'd be shocked at how similar the process is on the layering and, everything that goes into it. It's just wild.
It is cool. Like art has so many different forms. Like I love photography. I love painting. I love writing too. I've never done anything with it, but it's fun. Like it all does kind of blend. Like it does have that kind of process.
Right.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So it is fantastic. Thank you for answering all the questions because I know I've been very curious about your process and things from the book. So I appreciate you letting me fire away.
Listen, it's been my pleasure, my honor. And again, I would rather talk process than the end result. Seriously, I mean, people will say to me, "Oh, I really like the book." Okay. I really hated the book. Okay. I mean, the book's published. You know what I mean? Like those comments make, really, really good sense if it's a manuscript and it's not published and we can kind of make changes, right? But when we talk about process, it's very, very different, and what I want, like my wife and I, a few years ago, we go to the Norman Rockwell Museum out in the Berkshires in Massachusetts, right? So everybody's looking at the painting. I got the headset on. I just want to know the backstory. Like, why did he paint what he painted? Who are these people in the painting, right? So it's all about that human. Like if I read on World War II, and I'm a huge military history buff, I understand the machinery. I mean, I served in, the Gulf War. I understand how, those things work. I don't really care. Like what happened to the people? You know what I mean? How did it affect the people? You know what I mean? And that's what the story is. So
and you really see that with how you write too. That is, you're where the story is. You have just so much that you're bringing into it from all over.
Right.
I find that very fascinating. Yeah.
It's all about the story, and that's why, I think I may have mentioned it to you earlier, but that's why I love the holidays, right? Like, so when, you come to my house, we sit at the dining room table and people listen, like actually listen. And it used to be my grandfather, and then it became my father and his brothers. And now it's me and my brothers and sisters. And now their children listen. And now that we, the older children, they get a shot around the table and they tell a story. It's so much fun, right? And it becomes rich. It's like, the fabric of the family, right?
Yeah, it's something special and they can make it into their own thing and do that too. I love sitting around the table with stories. That is the best. We have story cubes and my daughter loves to make up stories and we'll sit there and add to it. And
I love that stuff.
Yeah.
I still have one of those mini tape recorders, right? And I still have my daughter. She's like 5 or 6 years old. And I would, talking to the tape recorder. Once upon a time, there was a princess that lived in a castle. And then I would hand her the tape recorder. And then she would talk, right? And then she'd hand it back to me. I'd pick up the story and I keep it. And I still have them. And I said, listen, the only difference is I write my stuff down, right? But in my head, I'm 8 years old, right? I have the imagination of, oh, there we go. We got a code 7. I think it's a squirrel. Squirrels. We got a squirrel.
My dog hears too. Oh no, squirrel.
Oh, here we go.
Yeah, my dog heard and is like, what?
Yeah.
Who is that?
Oh my goodness. Oh wow, it's cute. So cute. All right. Come here. anyway, it was a lot of fun, and it's, still stuff that we do. And now with my younger sisters having kids, I still do the same thing with them, but it's like, not all of you has to grow up. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Keep a little bit of, that.
And the great advice from you continues, because there's so many wonderful messages in your book, and I completely agree with that as well. I think that's beautifully said.
Yeah.
That is true.
I appreciate it. Thank you so much, Heather, and thank you, Karen, for joining us. I appreciate it.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yes, it's nice to see you in person, Karen. I know we've been doing everything virtually here, and thank you for coming, and thank you so much, Stephen, for this amazing follow-up interview and your amazing book. I can't wait to read more. Got my copy.
Thank you. There it is.
There it is.
There it is. 10 years in the making.
That's right.
Thanks again, and I'm sure we'll talk soon.
That sounds like a plan. Definitely. I'm going to keep updated on you and what you're doing. And oh my gosh, put all of your books in my Amazon cart. And
That's great.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, everybody. I hope you have
Thank
a good rest
you.
of your night.
Thanks, you too.
Bye. Bye-bye.